Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game Podcast. And today we have Jimmy with us. But before we kick off, Jimmy, are you prepared to engage?
I am ready.
Let's do this. Jimmy Chebat, that's the correct pronunciation. Is that decent at least?
It's close. Chebat is...
Chebat.
Chebat, yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So Jimmy Chebat is an enterprising business pioneer who has developed a digital initiative anticipated to address the paradigm shifts currently plaguing the workforce, due in part to the workplace culture identity crisis and the ever increasing rate of remote workers. We've seen a lot of this in the pandemic, of course. His portfolio of past business ventures emphasizes his ability to identify challenges facing personnel management, generating innovative solutions using his experience in data analytics, automated intelligence, and of course, gamification. The fourth industrial revolution is already here, and it's Jimmy's fully integrated system that's leading the digital transformation in the tomorrow that we need. That's exactly what we got from Jimmy. Is there anything that we're missing from that intro, Jimmy?
I think that was a perfect intro. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Jimmy. And before we start off, we'd like to know, you're a very busy man. You have all sorts of things going on in your company and all these ventures that you're sort of taking ahead. But we'd like to know, what does a day with you look like? If we were to follow you for a day or maybe for a week, wherever you want to go for, what would that look like? What does it feel to be Jimmy Chebat in a day like today?
Today actually was a really busy day for me. So it'd be a great day to kind of follow along and tag along to get an idea of what my day-to-day usually looks like. I'm involved in almost every facet of my enterprise, from the sales and marketing team to the development team to, the HR, finance, doing capital raises. So I'm usually all over the place, and also the lead salesman at the current moment. As we're launching, we're doing founder-led sales programs. Because I've got so much experience, right before I got on with you, I was doing a Zoom presentation for a company out of the Philippines, a call center that is looking for helping to engage their employees. So my day usually starts, with my kids and dropping them off at school, coming to work. I've got to have my first cup of coffee before I can address anything. And usually some stand-up meetings with different parts of my team members, making sure that there's no roadblocks for them and that they've got clear direction on what their day is going to look like. And, there's no obstacles that I can help with, or at least I can get out of their way. And then it's just meeting after meeting. And again, depending on my focus for that day, it could be purely feature development and working with my dev team and storyboarding some new features that we're building out. Working with our design team, they're building out some new UX or UI features, or working with my accountants as well as my attorneys and trying to close some finance deals as well. So, it's extremely dynamic, and it changes from day to day. And if I can get some travel in, I'm always happy to work on the road as well. But with COVID, that seems to be somewhat limited.
It's probably not been a good year for on the road kind of stuff.
No, you know what? I've had a chance because we're in upstate New York, and the weather's cold in the winter, so I've been able to go to some warmer climates, get an Airbnb, and just work from poolside, which is kind of giving me some alleviation from the grind of what COVID has brought to a lot of us in the workplace.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. And Jimmy, we were talking in the pre-interview chat that you've heard a couple of interviews of the podcast. So you know that this question is coming, because we would like to know, we come in strong. We like to learn from the past and from failures from our guests. And that is the moment where we talk about your favorite fail or first attempt in learning. One of those times where you wanted to do something, it just didn't work, especially in the space of gamification and game-based solutions. And, you tried to do something, it just didn't work. We want to be there with you, see how you came out of it. What did you learn? We want to live that experience alongside you.
Yeah, I mean, I have no shortage of those. I mean, nobody's really proud of failures, but as an entrepreneur, you kind of embrace them, and they're part of your your PhD in business, right? So it's an ongoing education. So I always look at mistakes as assets, learning opportunities, and looking at one particular failure when it has specifically to do with gamification, and one of the reasons why we've kind of went in this direction, developing Zizo, is an early iteration of Zizo, which we had called at that time the e-whiteboard. Gamification is, or contests is what we would call them, which is gamifying work, creating incentives. One of our biggest mistakes early on is there's actually two facets of it. Number one is not leveling the playing field, right? Is creating a contest where everybody's considered equal. And, at work and in any environment, really, not everybody's equal. There's people who have been there longer, who have tenure and a lot more experience and have a better chance at winning than somebody who's just starting, and just like with any video game or anything new, there's a learning curve. So right off the bat, those people are kind of handicapped. And so, we've taken from that lesson, because what happened is contests became counterproductive, where people would look at it and they would start, be energized and motivated in the beginning. And then later on, they'd say, you know what? I don't care about this contest anymore. It's, the same people are going to win anyways. And so, your leaders are going to be resented because they're always taking all the prizes away from everybody else. At least that's the way it's perceived. And so the purpose of the contest or the gamification is pretty much gone. The second component of that is also putting everyone in the same boat in terms of what the prize is going to be. Everybody has different palettes for what they deem to be important or favorable to them, or interesting to them in terms of prizes. So, even when you try to change the prizes, the giveaway, the reward, you're never going to satisfy everybody. And that was one of the biggest things that we took away and we built into this new platform with Zizo, is in ensuring that there is so much variety and there's so much range and micro rewards that's distributed throughout the entire platform, that everybody has equal opportunities and everybody gets to pick and choose their rewards at the end within our reward store. So I think those failures early on helped really set the direction for how we wanted to build this new platform.
As usual, learning from those lessons, from those, what we could call a past fail or first attempt in learning, is definitely key to opening the doors to the future, as you can see. So learning from those lessons is fundamental. In this case, learning about what the rewards can and should look like, what it means for every different type of person. And it brings us, as usual, to our player profiles, right? Different types of people, different personalities, different types of, ways to approach these problems that we set forth in gamification, these puzzles, right?
Right. So
shifting from a fail experience or a first attempt in learning, how about we go for actually a success? One of those stories that you're proud to tell. Maybe you don't have to name if it's a client. I know that there's some information you cannot reveal, but we want to be in that story, be along with you. Also take some lessons, maybe some of the key nuggets that you can take from that success. What are maybe one or two factors that you would say, well, these are some of the most important things? Of course, it's always a system. Everything is important, but what would be a few of those lessons you took from that experience?
And you know what? It's all related to the same experience with respect to, the trial and error, right? And as you said, you learn from your mistakes, but you definitely learn. It's even better to learn from your successes. And, our first, I guess, success we can identify is that total buy-in, that engagement. So when I developed this first iteration, it was more about accountability and transparency, developing a culture of accountability. And I set out to do so by creating a very objective management style. And, in our call center, there was different managers who had different management styles. And, those styles sometimes depended on relationships or mood. And really, I didn't like that. I didn't like people deciding how to manage and how they feel like managing. And I wanted something very objective. And so, the systems and the softwares that we would use for our day-to-day operations really failed to deliver the reporting. They were more focused on more of the account management, portfolio management, and compliance as opposed to performance. And so when I built this, it was more about, hey, how can I measure, track, and then report back to the people, the actual numbers that we're holding them accountable to, and then really setting those expectations. And as I said earlier, not everybody's created equal. And so by creating experience levels and setting expectations that are based on your experience level, it really leveled the playing field, and it created an environment and a culture of accountability that really was one of my proudest moments and one of my best successes is again, creating a ranking system that is based on experience, but providing opportunities for people to excel and be promoted through those ranks. And as you get promoted through those ranks, then so does your incentives and your rewards. They grow with it. So that was a great experience for me. It was one of my successes is learning and understanding through trial and error. But that was a really good success for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what would you take away from this? Like, what are some things, like, what did you do different? How were maybe some of the things that changed? Like you said, it was able to award people sort of more fairly in a way. Like, how did that look like? Are there any small reveals that you can make so that we can take some of that away?
Yeah, I'll tell you let me go back to the origin story, as you can say, for how this kind of debate started. A brother of mine is in the same industry, and he used to treat his, I'll put it in finger quotes, superstars like superstars, right? So they received all of the perks and the advantages and the preferred compensation packages. And again, it was based on, very subjective decisioning on maybe one or two measures, where I would treat everybody equally, regardless. And, it wasn't until variables changed and the environment changed within our industry where the compliance started becoming heavily regulated, and that we had to, this forced us to change this. And, I created this new system. But taking it away is that there's compromise, right? I had to, I would have this debate with my brother and say, the way you're doing it is wrong. And he would tell me the way I was doing it was wrong. There's always a compromise. There's a middle ground where he can give and you can give and find a solution. So I guess the takeaway is, and it's one of our traits here, it's agility, is never be set in stone with one thing. Never set your mind to something so strongly that you're unable to move and unable to change. Be more agile, be more flexible in your thinking and in your reactions and your decision making. Don't always assume that you're always right.
Being able to assume things and being right and being wrong is definitely something that is very, very important. And I like that one. I like that lesson very, very much. So thank you for that story, that lesson that you're sharing here today with the engagers. And moving to something else, because we've talked about success and failure at this point, and of course, you've done many things with Zizo. Mm-hmm. Is there some, when you're approaching one of these problems, one of these hairy, sticky problems, difficult things that you want to solve using, your strategies, using, of course, your platform as well, is there some sort of process that you follow, a thought process, a structure, I don't know, a framework? How do you go about using, gamification in your platform?
Well, I mean, that's also very dynamic, right? And so there's a process in terms of the evolution of an idea or a concept to reality, right? And, the beginning stages, really, a lot of this stems from watching my son play video games and being a gamer myself, growing up in the early stages of, Nintendo and then Sega Genesis, and then before the PlayStations and Xbox really took over the industry. But, I grew up on playing video games, and my son, I used to play as well. And, I got so busy that I would just come home and just watch him play. And some of the new games, really have features that are extremely well thought out. And so part of my process as I'm watching him play is to try to find that relationship between the interface and the game metrics and how he responds to it and how he navigates through it. And then I ask him a lot of questions, and he gives me feedback, and it's that loop of kind of watching. And even though I'm not playing the video game, I'm knowledgeable enough to understand what he's doing. And if I'm not, he's good enough. He's able to articulate it well enough for me to understand. And then I take that concept and I bring it into the office and I present it as an idea, as a concept, as what if we did something like this? And we take that feature and we try to find a way to mix it into our platform. And once it kind of passes the sniff test and, people they play devil's advocate and, there's always a little bit of give and take. And then if it gets improved, either it gets put into our roadmap and maybe as a future feature, or we say, you know what, that is something that we need right away. We wireframe it, we build it out. We kind of build the behaviors, how we want it to work within our application. And then it goes from low fidelity to high fidelity, and it goes to our development team, and then QA gets it tested, and then we deploy it as part of our next release. So, there is a process, but it's, like I said, it starts with me just observing what's working out there. It's I don't want to say it's hard to be innovative, because I think what we're doing is very innovative, but you can always borrow from what's out there and just make it better. That is kind of invention, right? Is just improving on things that are already working.
Absolutely. That's part of what innovation means, taking the things that are out there and putting them together in a different way. That is innovation in and of itself. I mean, creating something entirely new from scratch. That's, I'm not sure any of the things that we call innovation nowadays are any of that, right? Like, people say, innovation, something entirely new. iPhone. Well, the iPhone was not entirely new. It had, there were mobile phones that were already smartphones at the time, for example. So they had the processors already. Like, there were things going around, right? And I'm not saying it's not innovation. On the contrary, it was innovation. It was a different way of doing things, a different way of mixing them together, and a different user experience, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what made it innovative. Not that you had nothing, and from nothing you created light. That sounds more like, religious stuff, wherever you're standing with that. I mean, if you see it like that, the only one who's innovating would be, the deities or God or whatever you want to call it, right?
Right. Yeah, I watched a TED Talk not too long ago about originality and how there is nothing in this world that is actually original, that it all stems from something else.
And it makes sense, I think.
Yeah.
I have a strong opinion in that sense, but as usual, it is still an opinion. So thank you for that process. I was just curious because it seems like you're drawing sort of game mechanisms or things that are getting to be done from life itself, games themselves, observing things that are going out sort of in the wild, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean our target demographic is tomorrow's workforce. So when you look at tomorrow's workforce, it's our children, right? And what are they? I mean, today's day and age, technology is embedded, and when I talk to certain people and, I try to draw the analogy of, have you ever seen a toddler just pick up an iPad and intuitively just start navigating through? It's amazing. And I think we've kind of grown accustomed to that. But I remember the first time I seen, my son and my daughter pick up and just start kind of navigating through it. I used to play video games with my son, and his controller wouldn't be on. And one day when he was 3 years old, I decided to turn it on. And it was one of the most defining moments of my relationship with him is he knew how to play. I mean, he would play with a dead controller for probably about a year. But when I turned it on, he instinctively knew how to play the video game. And that tells me that, genetically speaking, it's becoming embedded in our DNA that we just know technology. And so tomorrow's workforce is being conditioned a lot by gamification. Gamification has become ubiquitous in almost every area of our life, and bringing it to work just seems like so natural and also inevitable. The problems of today's workforce is that they're disengaged and they're distracted. So let's use the tools that is distracting them to help them become more engaged with work.
So, Jimmy, let's actually pick it from there, because we've sort of been beating around the bush in that sense. What is Zizo actually doing right now? Like, what is the mission of Zizo? How's your company and your the software you're creating there helping this mission that you have there?
Well, we want to revolutionize workforce management. We know that as humans, we evolve. I think that over the past 2 decades, we've learned that change is inevitable, that we just can't try to force the new generation into old management styles, right? And so first thing that we had to do is learn how to leverage technology, right, to help us improve our management. It's through time efficiency, being able to buy ourselves time to be able to do more and spend more time with people. But, with COVID, it's really accelerated our need to really think about or rethink what the role of a manager really is. In the past, it's about accountability, it's about motivation, it's about training, it's about different things. But now I think that people are learning. There's a lot of tools that users could use to educate themselves. So you don't really need to be a trainer. There's now tools that you can use to motivate people and engage people. And that's part of what gamification is and what we're doing. Our role, or the role that we're trying to create for the manager, the new role, is more of a happiness engineer, right? And, to create a fun and engaging environment to keep their workforce happy while they're at work. So that way they're not going home and escaping reality into the augmented reality that is gamification, but bringing what inspires them to go there into their workforce. So that way they're inspired to go to work every day. And so we really want to just revolutionize workforce management to make it so that way it's about building happiness into work, so that way your day doesn't seem so monotonous and so repetitive, especially in industries like call centers or manufacturing, where you are doing repetitive tasks. And, burnout is really easy, and disengagement is even easier than that.
Absolutely. And talking about that, would you say that there are, again, it's not the golden mechanic or anything like that, just a best practice, something that you would say, well, when you introduce this, when you're thinking of workforce management and gamification, think about this, use this, and it'll definitely at least improve your project. Not make it perfect. I don't think there's such a thing, but at least make things better for you, make it easier, make it, better results. I don't know. What would you say is a best practice?
With respect to Zizo or in general?
In general, I'm sure you're implementing some of those.
Yeah, I think best practice. I mean, again, we are seeing a change in our world now that we've never seen before with COVID and the work from home, some of the lockdowns that are in place. So you're dealing with an environment that nobody's ever dealt with, at least not in a technological era, right? So it's about finding the right tools. I think that if best practices is finding the right tools for you and your organization, right? That works within the culture that you've either developed or have now forced to now redevelop. And, those tools can be things like, we talked earlier about Zoom, but that creates Zoom fatigue. And, people get tired of being in front of a camera or, on a mic and then they feel like when they talk about Big Brother, it's literally a camera watching you. It's different than being in a cubicle and your managers, right down, the hall from you. Even if they're over your shoulder. So, if the culture you're trying to create is more of a culture of accountability and you require technology to make sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, then maybe that's the tool for you. But if your culture is more about trust and communication and engagement, then, that's what we're trying to bring to the environment is that funness, is look, let the systems, let people kind of be motivated and be incentivized through this system and really just make it more engaging, make it more fun, build the games, the contests, the tournaments, the Easter eggs, so that way they're always engaged in something different. There's that variety. It's not always the same thing over and over again. So creating variety, I think, is important in today's day and age.
Absolutely. That's a great recommendation. And talking about recommendations, you've heard a couple of interviews. You've gone through many of the questions already. When you think of Professor Game and the guests that we have here, is there somebody that comes to mind? They say, oh, I'd like to listen to this person, answering these interview questions or something similar. Is there somebody that you would recommend that we should, have at the Professor Game podcast?
I don't know if I haven't gone through all of your podcasts and if you've had her on, but it's also one of your questions about my favorite books I recommend. But Jane McGonigal, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of it. Reality is Broken is the book.
Yes, absolutely. It's sitting right behind me right now.
It's one of my favorite books, and And, I'm more, a lot of the guests that you have on your show is more professors, academic, right? Where I'm more of a real life experience is where my knowledge comes from, is from just applying all the things that we're talking about. I didn't study it, formally in any educational institution. I would apply it just in the normal part of day-to-day business. And then I started to study it, as I explained earlier, through watching games and also monitoring my own behavior while I'm playing games. And so, when I read Reality is Broken, and she's got a really, and, that book was written, 2012, almost 10 years ago. And she really forecasted the future pretty well. So I'd love to hear her on your show if you haven't had her on before.
Absolutely. She is absolutely fantastic. We haven't had her. We've had, I don't want to defend myself. I just want to clarify that, we've had professors. We have a couple of academics, but I would say mostly we have practitioners who are doing gamification. Of course, after, 100, we'd probably be around 180 just about now. It's hard to go through such a list, and I completely understand it. I'm not saying anything. I just wanted to clarify that we have, bits of everything, and that's what we aim for. And of course, it is one of the reasons why you're here. So thank you for that recommendation. I'm guessing that if you were to recommend a book, you would be talking about Reality is Broken. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. It's a great
So you
book.
got the book out of the way.
Yes.
Absolutely. And Jimmy, we've been making all these questions. We've been talking about, you and your son playing, you playing a lot. We've been talking about games. And in that sense, we'd like to make one of those difficult questions, one of the tough ones. What would you say is your favorite game?
I've given this some thought, because that question comes up a lot in conversation. And, I think one of my favorite games of all time, and I've played this franchise from day one, is the EA Sports Madden game. And, it's gone through such a huge evolution, not just from a user interface and their graphics, but just the functionality and how, from a social standpoint, how you can play with just about anybody around the world. We're just like most games nowadays, but franchise mode, building a team and managing it. And it's probably one of my favorite games of all time. And, you can separate. It's just like saying what's your favorite movie or what's your favorite food, right? And there's so many categories. You like to split it up, but, in terms of sports games, that is number one, by far my number one, but I think I would place that as my favorite game of all time.
That sounds fantastic. It's one of those sports games. I haven't lived in America ever, so football, American football is not something that I completely or actually even understand too much, but I can definitely get being passionate about a sport and, following it as well through the video games. I've played a lot of FIFA. I like soccer or football, as they call it here in Europe, but that's something I enjoy quite a bit as well. So, sports are definitely something that is interesting. One of the things that I've seen, I don't know if Madden does the same thing, like FIFA by now, as well as the competing PES or something like that, Pro Evolution Soccer, yeah. They like literally every single year they have a new one. Is that the same for Madden as well?
Yeah, yes, it is. And, it's one of those things where, they just force you to buy a new game. But and I think I heard you talk about it in one of your podcasts with respect to Fortnite, is there's a lot of in-app purchases, right? So you have to buy the video game, and to really enhance your team is, you can buy and spend some money, some real dollars to develop your team. And, over the course of the year, you've really done, whether you put any effort and the sweat equity to build it up, or whether you took the shortcut and paid for some experience points and some coins to upgrade your team. You've taken pride in developing something, and then you got to start all over again, right? In the new year. But yeah, they do annual releases, and they used to have names for them. Now they just put the year at the end of them because they've gotten so far through all of the different games for the year.
Not to go too deep into the rabbit hole, but I've seen I just went through 2 or 3 of the different years. I mean, the very older ones like FIFA 98 was one of the first ones I played. But then more recently, like I think it was 14, 15, and now I have the 17. They kind of imported some of the things that you had there. Of course, not the full team, because of course as well the players changed and many other things. But they do kind of bring you some of the of the neat things that you had on the experience point side and some of the things you can sort of purchase without experience. They kind of brought some of that, but of course it can be frustrating. Like you've managed this whole team for a year or so. You've gotten it so far, and now you basically start from scratch in many ways.
Yeah, and in the past, when you'd look forward to the new year, the new release, because you're getting all of the latest features, and you get no upgrades or updates throughout the year. But now, when you're connected to the internet, they're constantly releasing, whether it's a roster update, whether it's a feature release update. They're constantly doing updates, and you're getting real live updates, as frequently as you log into the platform or to the console. But it's not that excitement level anymore that it used to be, where it's like, I can't wait for the new graphics. And that was the big thing, is just the graphics. Yeah. And now the graphics. And
at this point, to be fair as well, the graphics are not so different from one year to the other.
No, not anymore. I mean, in the past, you would see a considerable change. Some you liked, some you didn't. And sometimes they would actually go backwards because they just, but that's part of the continuous feedback loop, right? Is, they would have to wait a whole year before they get feedback. And then they wouldn't be able to provide the new updates until the following year. Now it's continuous releases, and they're making the changes on the fly.
Absolutely. And we talked about, recommendations of games, of books, of speakers or guests for the podcast. How about you, Jimmy? What do you think is, or what do you feel is your superpower, that sweet spot, that thing that you do at least better than most other people, that thing that, sort of distinguishes you out from the crowd?
Man, when it comes to creating game-based solutions, I would have to say is my agility. I think it's one of my greatest strengths, and one of the strengths that I think people need in today's day and age is to be able to pivot, so quickly, and make those changes on the fly. I think a lot of the older generation, mine included, I'm dating myself here, is you kind of get set in your ways, and as you gain more experience and experience more success, you kind of you get a little cocky, and a little bit overconfident, and you just kind of get set in stone. So I think my agility, my ability to adapt, whether it's to environment, but my flexibility to listen to others. And as I mentioned earlier in that story about my brother, is compromise, right? Is not think that you know everything. So I think agility is one of those traits and those tool sets that if everybody can put in their tool belt, would help them a long ways. And, I learned the tough way on that one, several times before actually applying it to my day to day.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Beautiful, beautiful way of seeing it, and very, very useful as well. So, Jimmy, we can't thank you enough for being with us today. I know that your life, is quite busy, many things going on, as we were talking at the start. However, you've invested this time in the Engagers, to bring your message, your experience, your knowledge. But before we let you go, we want to know if you have any sort of final piece of advice, any final words that you want to have. Of course, let us know where we can find more about you, about Zizo. I don't know, anywhere you want to point us to, any CTAs that you have at the end. This is the time to do it.
Yeah, number one, to connect with me, playzizo.com. That's play and then ZIZO.com is where you can learn more about our application and what we're building and how we're looking to revolutionize workforce management. And then all of my social media links are on that website, and you can find me there, and Jimmy@playzizo.com if you want to shoot me over an email. As far as quick advice for listeners, whether you're a gamer, an engager, obviously with your followers here, as a business person, entrepreneur, or anybody, I talked about agility, I talked about compromise, but on this topic of gamification, having fun, I think, is really, really important, and not taking life too seriously. I think we live in a very polarizing world right now, where whether it's politics, whether it's how you view, COVID, and, it could really stress you out. And I think that's why a lot of people kind of escape, from this reality. But have fun. Don't take life too seriously. Be agile, be ready to change, and also be empathetic, to people who don't think or act like you, because you never know what their situation's about. So I think, whether it's empathy, having fun, being agile, all of the above. That would be my advice to your listeners.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much for that advice. Remember, you can find all of this information at playzizo.com. You can find Jimmy Chebat, all of the jazz all about Zizo as well. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with these amazing guests that we always have, people like Jimmy, then all you have to do is go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started into our email list. And that is for free as well. That way we can be in contact and you will be the first to know of these opportunities that we are now starting to create through Professor Game, especially created for you. And before you go on to your next mission, remember you can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. That is also for free so that you can listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.